Welcome to your introduction to Story Framework. This video will be covering points such as navigating through Story Framework's folders and objects inside the content browser, further expanding upon this template by following Story Framework's development guidelines, and explaining the general workflow that is used inside Story Framework. Timestamps and links are attached in the description. So without further ado, let's hop straight into it. So you've just installed and created a fresh copy of Story Framework. Let's dive into navigating through Story Framework's folders. Let's open up the content browser and go to Story Framework. You'll see we have four main folders. We have Core, Menus, Save Game, and Utility. So let's hop into Core. You see we'll have Blueprints, Example, UI, and our game instance. So let's open up the Blueprints folder. You'll see we have everything neatly organized into their own separate folders. So we have interfaces, blueprint libraries, components, curves, so on and so forth. And then we have the four sort of core parent blueprint classes inside Story Framework. So we have the inspect actor. So this is used for things like inspecting actors and the journal. So any 3D actor that needs to be viewed through a widget is utilizing this component or this actor. We have the interactable base. So this is the parent class for any interactable inside Story Framework, whether that's generators, NPCs, pickups, journal items, everything derives from the interactable base class. Next we have the NPC interactable base. So this is a derivative of the interactable base class, and this utilizes a bunch of NPC functionality included in Story Framework. Further tutorials for NPCs can be found to demonstrate how to convert these actors into characters that can move around in the world. So next we have the SF player camera underscore PCM. So this is the player camera manager class that is used by the character and the controller. This dynamic camera is what powers features such as swapping between first person and third person shoulder swapping, first person leaning, looking at specific targets, and so on and so forth. Now that we've touched on the basic intro to the Blueprints folder, let's hop into finding where all the heavy lifting happens when it comes to actor component functionality. So let's go into the components folder. You'll see we have two folders here. We have Core and Other. So Core includes the four core actor components that derive all other functionality from. So we have the camera manager, which is just used to set up the camera onto the player controller. So this will communicate and relay the structure information for the camera into the player camera manager. Next, we have the interaction manager. So this powers any interaction found within the Story Framework. So this relays any sort of interactable functionality and information between other components. Next, we have the inventory manager. So this is used for things such as the player's quick inventory and the journal. So this includes functionality for adding and removing items for both those systems, and also extra functions that can be utilized inside your own blueprints for acquiring information from the player's inventory or journal. Next, we have the sequence manager. So this is used for playing sequences in the level through Story Framework's own play sequence node. So this node provides extra features such as looping or toggling whether or not a sequence can be stopped. The sequence manager also handles subtitled sounds. So the sequence manager includes a function called play subtitled sound. So that will play and display custom-made subtitles in the level. Now that we've covered the four primary components, let's head back into the components folder and find other. Here we have the NPC manager actor component and the interaction widget scene component. So the interaction widget scene component is the interaction prompts that can be found on all the different interactable objects. So this handles the different opacities of the interaction prompts. This also handles occlusion when the interaction prompt isn't in line of sight from the player, as well as communicating information from interactable objects into the prompt widget. Then we have the NPC Manager Actor component. So this is utilized for all the NPC functionality found in Story Framework. So this handles replying, initiating conversation, ending conversation, and utilizing the consequential tags, which will be covered inside another tutorial. Now that we've gone over all the different actor components and scene components found in Story Framework, let's head back into Blueprints and go to the Blueprint libraries. So inside the Blueprint libraries, we have 4 different function libraries that all includes functions for essentially making your life easier when it comes to creating systems and adding functionality inside Story Framework. So let's hop into the camera general functions. You'll see here under camera and other, we have a collection of different camera functions that can be utilized. These functions all communicate with the SF Player Camera Manager, so we have things such as attaching components to the camera, detaching components, setting field of view, camera distance, pitch clamps, fading, getting play rate lengths in seconds, is using gamepads, and getting the camera states. Then if we head back over to our content browser, we have the gameplay functions. So inside the gameplay functions, we have all the different collection of functions that is used by different actor components inside Story Framework. So for save game, we have destroy actor save game, spawn actor save game, load system info, and update interactable actors. Next, we have controller interface. So this is a collection of references to the different actor components inside Story Framework. So the Get SF Interaction Manager is just simply a blueprint interface call that gets the interaction manager from the player controller and feeds it into the output for the function. And this repeats for all the different references under controller interface. Next, we have a collection of extra functions that can be utilized yourself and is also used for a lot of different functionality inside Story Framework. So we have things such as outlining actors using a post process. We have update input mapping context, so this will update the player's input mapping at runtime. We have get SF sound settings data table, which will be covered further on. We have a simple first person component hide, which is used when swapping to first person to hide the player character. We have toggle pause game. We have find menu button in map, which is used for the user interface in Story Framework. We have a reference to get pause menu widget. And then we have the load SF components into memory, which is an optimization function targeted more at lower end systems that struggle to load in functionality through actor components on the initial playthrough. Next, inside the content browser, we have SF general functions. So this is a wide variety of essentially quality of life functions that can be utilized. So for instance, under math, we have a collection of all different math nodes. Things like getting values as percentages, integer map range clamps, random colors, bounce line traces, sum arrays, so on and so forth. Then we have the quality of life. So again, just a collection of functions that help speed up workflow inside blueprints. Then we have debugs. So this is to help debug different variable types. So we have print bool, print int, float, string array, transform, vector, rotator. Then inside the trace results, this is a collection of all the different hit trace results that come out of a line trace. This is just simply an easier way to get references to each individual variable inside a break hit result. So this goes over all the different break hit result variables. So now that we've gone over the essentials inside the blueprint folder, let's head back to the core and hop into the example folder. So inside the example folder, this is simply just a collection of children classes of some of the Blueprint parent classes. So inside character, this is where we'd find the demo character and player controller. Then back in the example, we have level, which is where the two main menu and example maps are found. Inside level actors, we have a bunch of children examples of interactable base actors. So these are actors set up with custom functionality deriving from the interactable base, which you can scan through and learn how different systems are set up, different interactable systems. Then back in level actors, we have triggers. We have the set camera preset area, which is just simply a box trigger for fixed cameras. Then back in level, we have level materials, which is just all the different materials that are used throughout the level or throughout the demo level. And same thing with level meshes. Then back in example, we have sequences. So this is all the different sequences included in the demo level to demonstrate the sequence manager. So inside sounds, this is where all the different sounds are stored that are played throughout the example map and for NPC interaction and for other functions such as the subtitled sounds. So we have the sound class mix for adjusting the master volume inside the main menu. We have attenuation, we have a collection of sound cues and voice lines, as well as the sound waves for all these different sound cues. So that covers the example folder. Let's hop into user interface. So this is the 3 different folders that contain all the content for the user interface found all throughout Story Framework, except for main menus, which we will get to. So inside fonts, we have the 2 different free fonts that are included. Inside textures are all the different icons for, say, input keys and save icons and so on. And then inside widgets are all the different widgets such as dialog responses, the inspect widgets, the interaction prompts, journals, and so forth. Then back in core, we have the game instance. So this game instance is utilized if you are using Story Framework's save game. If you have your own save game or want to set up your own save game, then you would use your own game instance. But if you're using everything as given and you're utilizing Story Framework's save game, then this is your game instance. Then if we go back to the Story Framework folder, we have menus. So this is the systems for the main menu. So we have the game mode and the main menu controller inside the blueprints folder. We have input. So this contains the widget menu input mapping context. And then we have textures, which is just a single texture for the different menus. And inside user interface, we have the pause menu and main menu. And then we have a menu button parent class for buttons inside menu widgets, which is covered inside another tutorial, as well as the menu master. Then out of menus, we have the save game. So we have the save game object, which is used for storing the different save variables. Inside blueprints components, we have the save manager, which is used for saving and loading at runtime. So this gets attached to the player controller the same way that the core actor components gets attached to the player controller. We have structures for the different information for saving. Then out of the save game folder, we have utility. So this is a SF Tools editor utility widget that helps streamline specific parts when setting up systems. So the camera content section has a current viewport camera transform. So this is to help set up fixed cameras as you need to put in specified values for location and rotation for the fixed cameras, and as well as the sound playback section. So if we go into core, example, sounds, cues, and pick a sound, let's pick voice line A, we can utilize the playback to set up subtitled sounds at specific times in the sound cue.
Photo. Reminds me of my...
So now that we've gone over all the different content found in Story Framework, let's talk a little bit about how Story Framework actually works. So if we go into our core folder, into example, character, and open up our demo player controller, this is where our different actor components get attached. So we have the interaction manager, sequence, inventory, the save, and the camera manager. Then inside class defaults, this is where we set the player camera manager class. So you'll notice inside the player character we have no camera component, because everything is, or all camera functionality is driven through the player camera manager. Then inside class settings we have the SF player controller data BPI. So this is used to get information, or to get the actor component information from the player controller to utilize inside other blueprints. So now let's talk a bit more about understanding and expanding upon Story Framework's actor component based workflow. So let's navigate to our components folder in blueprints, and let's open up our interaction manager. So if we were to want to expand onto these systems, we would need to sort of categorize our functionality into these different actor components. So for instance, if you were setting up a custom system for locks or door locks or opening doors, that would be done inside the interaction manager. Alternatively, you could just utilize the default workflow, which is adding functionality into one of the character or controller blueprints. So you'll see if we open up the character BP, this section is or contains very minimal functionality. We have the set character visibility for first person, we have the anim montage for interacting, and then just a simple create intro widgets on begin play. So you can create and set up your own systems inside the player character as usual, or the player controller. So if we go back to the event graph, you'll notice we have these 5 different collapse graphs, which are all input related functionality. So we have the generic movement, which is just the simple movement code that is provided from the third person template. Then we have begin play, which utilizes the update input mapping context function to set the first input mapping as Story Framework's gameplay inputs. Then we have the load SF components into memory, and then we have the save manager setting up an autosave every 20 seconds. So this applies for all the different inputs in Story Framework. So you'll notice inside shared input, these get quite long, as the navigate input, for instance, has to navigate multiple different systems. So by utilizing the update input mapping context function, the navigate input will only execute a function depending on the current input mapping. So we can set up chains of different functionality on a single input, as these functions will only fire if we are in the correct input mapping context. So the player controller can also be utilized to set up your own systems if you would like to go down that route. Finally, let's talk about Story Framework's general workflow. Story Framework uses exposed structure variables on majority of the items and objects created. This allows for an extremely large variety of different variations of items and customizations of other objects. We use this workflow to streamline creating story-related experiences for our players, by minimizing the amount of separate actors needed for different settings or types of interaction. We keep development simple and easy to adapt. Story Framework as a whole focuses on providing you with an easy-to-use, documented and supported story game template that centers its gameplay around a polished and smooth feel, whilst keeping input-related functionality as responsive and understandable as possible. A story game is about guiding your player through a narrative, and Story Framework provides the tools you need to build a narrative experience that can be appreciated, regardless of the genre your project is. But with all that out the way, this just about covers the entire introduction to Story Framework as a whole. We have further tutorials on Visual One's YouTube channel, and full support in our Discord. All links can be found on Story Framework's product page on the Unreal Marketplace.